When a girl ages out of the system, with nothing but a key and $3 to her name, the world expects her to fail. But what she discovered in her grandmother's abandoned house wasn't just an inheritance. It was a history, a weapon, and a second chance. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, with only a promise to keep, then I want you to stick around and subscribe. This story is for us. This story is about what it truly means to come home. The day I turned 18 felt less like a birthday and more like an eviction. There was a cake, of course. A sheet cake from the grocery store with blue frosting that stained your teeth and spelled out, "Happy Birthday, Maya," in wobbly red gel. It was the standard issue cake for all of us at the Northwood Group home, a transient dessert for a transient population. 2 years of mandatory therapy, 2 years of shared bathrooms, 2 years of trying to make myself as small as possible so no one would notice me. And then, freedom, or what they called freedom. Mrs. Gable, the house supervisor whose smile never quite reached her tired eyes, handed me a single cardboard file box. My entire life, or what the state of Oregon had curated of it, fit inside. "This is it, Maya," she said, her voice laced with a practiced, gentle finality. "Your file, your birth certificate, social security card, and this." She tapped a smaller, shoebox-sized container resting on top. It was wrapped in faded floral paper, the kind I vaguely remembered from a life before this one. "This was left for you, in trust, to be given to you on your 18th birthday." My breath caught. For 10 years, since the day my grandmother Eleanor had walked me to a social worker's car and promised she would be right back, there had been nothing. Not a letter, not a call, not a single word. The official story was that she was unfit, unstable. The unofficial story I told myself in the dark was simpler. She had left me. She had gotten tired of the burden and walked away. This box felt like a ghost, a message from a past I had tried so hard to bury. The other girls in the common room watched, their curiosity a palpable thing in the air. They knew my story, or the version of it we were all given. The girl with no one. The girl whose grandma disappeared. To them, this box was a spectacle. "Aren't you going to open it?" Kira asked, leaning over the back of the worn-out sofa. I clutched the box to my chest. Later. Later came an hour later, on a city bus bench smelling of rain and exhaust. The file box sat beside me like a silent, judgmental companion. I didn't care about the state's paperwork. I only cared about the shoebox. My fingers trembled as I tore the paper. It was old, the tape brittle. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, were 3 things. A single, old-fashioned skeleton key, heavy and ornate, its brass finish tarnished to a deep brown. A small, folded note, and 3 crisp, single-dollar bills. $1, $2, $3. My inheritance. A laugh escaped my lips, a harsh, brittle sound that had no humor in it. $3. It was so absurd, so cosmically insulting it was almost funny. This was the grand mystery? The final word from the woman who had raised me, the woman who taught me how to read and how to find constellations in the night sky? A key to nothing, a pittance, and a note. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, but I recognized it instantly. Her elegant, looping script, now spiderweb thin. "My dearest Maya," it read. "If you are reading this, I am gone. I am so sorry. For everything. Go to the house. The key is for the front door. Where the winter sun hits at noon, you'll find the rest. Don't let them take it. It's all I have left to give you. It's your home." Below the signature was an address in a town I'd never heard of, a place called 10 Mile Creek, and another line. "P.S. There is also a letter from a Mr. Davies. He will explain the things I cannot." I rummaged through the file box from Mrs. Gable and found it at the bottom. A crisp, business-sized envelope from Davies and Howe, attorneys at law. So the final insult wasn't just $3. It was $3 and a lawyer's bill. The weight of it all, the disappointment, the grief, the sting of a decade of silence culminating in this pathetic little package was suffocating. I sat on that bench as the city churned around me, a girl with no past and a future that cost $3. A key to a house I didn't know, a cryptic clue, and the lingering, bitter taste of abandonment. I didn't know it then, but this wasn't the end of a sad story. It was the beginning of a fight for my life, for my grandmother's memory, and for the very definition of home. The laughter I'd imagined from my foster siblings, the pity from the social workers, it was all real. But they were laughing at the wrong thing. They were laughing at the box, not knowing that the real inheritance was the fight it was about to start. The law office of Davies and Howe was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown that smelled of old paper and floor wax. It was the kind of place that was meant to feel solid, permanent, a deliberate contrast to the flimsy impermanence of my life so far. I'd called the number on the letter, my voice small and uncertain, and a secretary had scheduled me for the following afternoon. I spent the night in a youth shelter, the $3 still tucked in my pocket, feeling more like a child playing dress-up than a legal adult. Mr. Davies was an older man, with kind eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses and a suit that was probably older than I was. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a librarian. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. "Miss Morales," he began, his voice calm and even. "I was your grandmother's attorney. I knew Eleanor for a long time. I'm very sorry for your loss." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He had a file on his desk with her name on it. It looked thin. "Eleanor set up a trust for you," he continued, folding his hands on the polished desk. "It contained the box you received and stipulated that I should meet with you upon your 18th birthday to explain the situation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The situation is not good, Maya. I want to be upfront about that." He slid a sheaf of papers across the desk. They were covered in intimidating logos and dense, single-spaced text. Foreclosure notice, notice of public auction, delinquency statement. The numbers were staggering, a mountain of debt that made my head spin. "Your grandmother owned her property outright for many years," he explained, his tone gentle but firm, like a doctor delivering a bad diagnosis. "The house in 10 Mile Creek. About 10 years ago, she took out a home equity loan, a rather significant one. The terms, frankly, were predatory. The interest rate was variable and ballooned aggressively. She fell behind on the payments almost immediately. Why? The word was a whisper. Why would she do that? Mr. Davies sighed, a deep, weary sound. I asked her that many times. She was a proud woman. She never gave me a clear answer. She just said there were expenses, an emergency. By the time she came to me, the debt had already spiraled. We tried to renegotiate with the lender, a firm called Apex Holdings, but they were uncooperative. We tried to declare bankruptcy to halt the proceedings, but she refused. She was adamant about not losing the house. He leaned forward, his expression softening with something that looked like genuine pity. "Maya, the outstanding debt, with penalties and fees, is now well over $200,000. The property itself, in its current state, is assessed at maybe half that. The estate is, in legal terms, insolvent, deeply in the red. That's why there was no money for you. The $3? I suspect that was Eleanor's way of making a point. A bit of gallows humor, perhaps. It was all that was left after the estate's filing fees were accounted for. The room felt cold. Gallows humor. My grandmother, who used to make me laugh until my sides hurt, was reduced to a dark joke in a legal file. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The house is scheduled for a foreclosure auction in 30 days, he said. Apex Holdings will almost certainly be the buyer, taking possession to settle the debt. My legal advice, as the executor of this very small estate, is to walk away. There is nothing here for you but your grandmother's debt. Sign this document, and you will be formally absolved of any connection to the property and its liabilities. You can start fresh. The state has resources, transitional housing programs." He was trying to be kind. He was doing his job. He was telling me to give up, just like everyone else had. But her note, "Don't let them take it. It's your home." It was a plea from beyond the grave, a final, desperate command. How could I walk away from the only thing she had left me, even if it was just a pile of debt and a dilapidated house? "What if I don't sign?" I asked, pushing the document back across the desk. Mr. Davies looked surprised. "Then, technically, you remain the heir to an insolvent estate. The debt isn't yours personally, but the house will be lost at auction all the same. You would just be prolonging the inevitable. There's no way to stop it, Maya. You'd need to pay the full outstanding balance to the bank, over $200,000. $200,000. I had $2 left, having spent one on a coffee to get out of the rain that morning. The absurdity of it was crushing. Yet, I couldn't shake her words. "Where the winter sun hits at noon, you'll find the rest." The rest of what? More debt? An apology? "I want to see it," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "The house. I want to go there." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze searching. He saw the file box I was clutching, the key I had threaded onto a frayed shoelace around my neck. He saw a girl who had nothing, clinging to the only thread she had. "It's a long way," he said slowly. "It's very remote. There's a bus that goes to Roseburg, and from there another one that gets you close, but it's a few miles walk from the highway." He opened a drawer and pulled out a map, circling a spot deep in the winding green of the Umpqua National Forest. "The property is as is. The power has been off for years. So has the water. It won't be comfortable." "I'm not looking for comfort," I told him. He nodded, a flicker of something, respect maybe, in his eyes. He took a pen and wrote a number on the back of his business card. "This is my cell phone. If you get into any trouble, or if you change your mind, you call me, day or night." He pushed the card across the desk. "The bus leaves from the station on 5th Street. It will take most of the day to get there." I stood up, the leather chair sighing again. I had a destination. I had a key. And I had a cryptic instruction from a ghost. It wasn't a plan, not really. It was just a refusal to accept the end of the story. I walked out of that quiet, orderly office and into the chaos of the city, the lawyer's words echoing in my ears. "There is nothing here for you." He was wrong. There was a promise, and I was going to see it through, even if it led to nothing but a final, heartbreaking goodbye. The bus ticket cost me almost everything I had from my final state stipend. As the city skyline shrank in the window behind me, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't being sent somewhere. I was going somewhere. The bus ride was a long, slow crawl out of the urban sprawl and into the deep, wet green of Oregon. The windows fogged with the collective breath of the passengers, blurring the endless pines into watercolor streaks. I watched the city give way to suburbs, then to farmland, then to nothing but forest and the winding ribbon of the highway. With every mile, I felt like I was traveling not just through space, but through time, heading back toward a part of myself I had locked away. I tried to remember the house, but the memories were hazy, like old photographs left out in the sun. I remembered a porch swing, the smell of baking bread, my grandmother's hands covered in flour, but the details of the place itself were lost to the trauma that followed. The second bus was smaller, older, and smelled of diesel fumes and damp wool. It rattled along a two-lane road that hugged the curves of the Umpqua River. The other passengers were mostly locals, loggers and fishermen with weathered faces who got off at unmarked dirt roads. Finally, the driver called out, 10 Mile Creek turnoff, last stop before the coast. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, my lone figure in the nearly empty bus. You sure this is where you want to be, kid? There ain't nothing out here but trees and a whole lot of quiet. I'm sure, I said, hoisting my file box. He shrugged, pulling over to the gravel shoulder. Road to the old Morales place is about 3 miles up that way, he said, pointing to a barely visible dirt track that disappeared into the woods. Be careful. Cell service is spotty. The bus pulled away, leaving me in a sudden, profound silence, broken only by the drip of water from the ferns lining the road. The air was cool and clean, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a world away from the group home, from the city, from everything I had known for the last decade. The walk was harder than I expected. The file box was awkward and heavy, and my cheap sneakers were not meant for the muddy, rutted road. Twice, I had to step aside for logging trucks that thundered past, their drivers giving me curious looks. After what felt like an eternity, the road opened into a clearing, and there it was. The house was smaller than I remembered, a simple 2-story farmhouse with a wide front porch. The paint was peeling, the roof was sagging in one corner, and the windows were dark and vacant. A massive oak tree, the one that held the porch swing of my memories, stood sentinel in the overgrown yard. The swing itself was gone, only 2 rusty chains hanging like broken limbs. It looked sad, it looked abandoned, it looked like me. My heart pounded as I walked up the creaking porch steps. This was it, the place it all ended, the place I was left. I stood before the front door, its dark green paint faded to a chalky mint. I pulled the key from around my neck. My hand was shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to fit it into the lock. I held my breath, turned it, and felt the old mechanism resist, then give way with a loud, satisfying clunk. The door swung inward on a groan of rusty hinges, opening into a dark, still space. I stepped inside, and the air shifted. It was cold, but not the damp cold of outside. This was a dry, stale cold, thick with the dust of forgotten years. A faint, familiar scent lingered beneath the dust: cinnamon, lavender, and old books. My grandmother's smell. Sunlight struggled through the grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. The furniture was all there, draped in white sheets like a room full of ghosts. I pulled the sheet off a nearby armchair, revealing worn, floral upholstery. I remembered sitting on that chair, tucked against my grandmother's side, while she read to me from a book of fairy tales. I moved through the house like a trespasser in my own past. The kitchen was a time capsule. A calendar on the wall was still turned to August, 10 years ago. A coffee cup sat in the drying rack by the sink. It felt like she had just stepped out for a moment, not for a decade. Upstairs, I found her bedroom. The bed was neatly made. A book lay face down on the nightstand, her glasses resting on top of it, as if she intended to pick it up again at any moment. This wasn't the room of a woman who had planned to leave. This was the room of a woman who had been interrupted. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long began to curdle into something else. Confusion. A deep, aching sorrow. Nothing about this place felt like an abandonment. It felt like a tragedy. I went back downstairs to the living room, the heart of the house. And then I remembered the note, where the winter sun hits at noon. It was late afternoon now, the sun casting long shadows across the floor, but I could guess. In the winter, the sun would be low in the southern sky. It would shine through the large picture window and fall directly onto a spot in the middle of the hardwood floor. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold silence. I ran my hands over the floorboards. They were smooth, worn with age. Then my fingers brushed against it. A slight ridge, a seam that wasn't quite flush with the others. I pressed on the edge of the board, and it gave slightly, with a soft squeak. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Using the tip of the heavy brass key, I wedged it into the crack and pried. The board resisted, then lifted with a groan of old nails. Beneath it was not dirt or insulation, but a dark, hollow space. And in that space sat a box. It wasn't a shoebox. It was a heavy, black metal case, like a military footlocker, with two sturdy latches on the front. It was cold to the touch. It took all my strength to lift it out of the hole and set it on the floor. It was heavy. Impossibly heavy. For a moment, I just stared at it, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was the rest. This was what she had left for me. With trembling fingers, I clicked open the latches. They sprang up with a sharp, metallic snap that echoed in the silent house. I lifted the lid, and what I saw inside made the air leave my lungs in a rush. I didn't understand, not yet. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Mr. Davies had been wrong. There was something here for me, and it was going to change everything. The inside of the metal box did not glitter with gold or jewels. It was far more practical and far more shocking. The first thing I saw was the cash, neat, tight bundles of it wrapped in simple rubber bands. 50s and 20s, mostly. It wasn't a king's ransom, not the millions you see in movies, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I pulled out one bundle. It felt solid, real, heavy with a significance that went beyond its monetary value. I counted it quickly. $5,000. There were at least 10 more bundles just like it. $50,000, maybe $60,000. A fortune to a girl who had been living on a state stipend allowance. But it wasn't $200,000. It wasn't enough to stop the auction. Beneath the cash, there was more. A large, manila envelope, thick and heavy, with my name written on it in my grandmother's hand. And under that, a dense folder bulging with documents. Not the official-looking foreclosure notices Mr. Davies had shown me, but older papers. Carbon copies of loan agreements, pages of fine print, and a series of letters. The letterhead was from Apex Holdings, the same company that was taking the house. My hands were shaking as I picked up the thick envelope addressed to me. This was it. The explanation, the apology, the truth. I sat on the dusty floor, the cold of the wood seeping through my jeans, and pulled out a sheaf of pages, at least 20 of them, filled with that familiar, spidery handwriting. I began to read. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I have failed. I want you to know, before you read anything else, that I never, ever wanted to leave you. Not for a single second. Sending you away was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it has been a wound in my heart every day since. I hope, after you read this, you will understand why. I don't ask for your forgiveness, only for your understanding. It started with the well. You were 7. You might remember that summer, our well ran dry. It happens out here sometimes. I got a quote to drill a new, deeper one, and the number was staggering. $10,000. I didn't have it. I had my pension, my Social Security, but I lived month to month. A week later, a letter came in the mail. It was from a company called Apex Holdings. It was an offer for a home equity loan. It looked professional, friendly. It said I could use the value of my home to get the cash I needed. "Use your home to build your future," the slogan read. It seemed like a sign, a solution. A man came to the house. His name was Mr. Sterling. He was charming, kind. He complimented my garden, told you that you had my smile. He made it all sound so simple. He said because of my age and fixed income, a traditional bank would say no, but his company believed in helping people like me. He glossed over the paperwork, pointing here and there, telling me this was just standard procedure. The interest rate looked low. He said I could pay it back in small monthly installments. I trusted him. I signed the papers. It was the single greatest mistake of my life. The money came, and I had the new well drilled. For the first few months, everything was fine. Then the letter started. The payment had gone up. Mr. Sterling had mentioned a variable rate, but he'd made it sound like a footnote. It wasn't. It was the whole story. The rate doubled, then tripled. I called him frantic. He was no longer charming. He was cold, impatient. He said I should have read the fine print. I went to a lawyer in town, but he took one look at the contract and shook his head. It was, he said, predatory, but technically legal. The contract I signed had a clause, buried deep in the jargon, that allowed the rate to adjust to almost anything they wanted after 6 months. I fell behind. The penalties and fees they added were criminal. The debt grew like a cancer. They were going to take the house, Maya. Our home. The place your grandfather and I built with our own hands. The only thing of value I had to leave you. I started selling things. Your grandfather's tools, my jewelry, anything I could to make the payments. But it was like trying to fill the ocean with a teaspoon. Then came the second visit from Mr. Sterling. He came with another offer. He said he knew I was in trouble. He said his company had other interests. They were buying up land in the valley. They wanted my property for a new resort development. He said if I signed the house over to them, they would forgive the debt and give me a small sum to relocate. When I refused, his tone changed. He started talking about you. He said that if I went into foreclosure, the state would investigate my finances. They would see I couldn't provide a stable home. They would see the debt. He said, "A child needs stability, Eleanor. Are you being selfish, holding on to this place when you can't even afford to keep the lights on? They'll take her from you anyway." He wasn't just a loan officer, Maya. He was a predator. He was using you as leverage. It was a threat. And I realized then they didn't just want the house. They wanted it for nothing. They had engineered the whole situation. The loan wasn't a loan. It was a trap designed to fail so they could seize the asset. I looked into Apex Holdings. It was a subsidiary of a massive development corporation. They were doing this to people all over the state, targeting elderly homeowners in rural areas. I was terrified. Not for me, but for you. If I fought them and lost, you would be caught in the middle of it. You would be taken by the state, and I would be left with nothing. I couldn't bear the thought of them taking you from me in this house. So I made a choice, a terrible, horrible choice. I decided to get you out first, to put you somewhere safe, where they couldn't touch you, where you would be fed and clothed while I figured out how to fight them. I took you to the social services office in Roseburg. I told them I couldn't cope. I told them lies that broke my own heart. I let them think I was unstable, unfit. It was the only way to make sure they took you quickly, without a long investigation that would uncover the debt. The social worker looked at me with such pity. She didn't see a woman trying to save her grandchild. She saw a broken old woman who was failing. And I let her. I walked away from you that day because I loved you too much to let you be destroyed with me. My plan was to disappear from their radar. I stopped answering their calls. I started working odd jobs for cash, cleaning houses, mending clothes, anything. And every spare dollar I put in this box. My plan was to save enough money to be an anonymous bidder at the foreclosure auction, to buy our own home back from them with cash, so they would never know it was me. It was a crazy plan, but it was the only one I had. But the debt grew faster than I could save, and my body gave out before I could finish. I ran out of time. Inside this box is all the money I saved. It's not enough, I know that, but it's a start. Also inside this box is the file. Everything I have on them. The original loan agreement, copies of the threatening letters, my notes on other families they targeted. It might be nothing. It might be everything. Mr. Davies is a good man, but he is cautious. He plays by the rules. Apex Holdings does not. Maybe this evidence can give him a weapon to fight with. You have a choice, my sweet girl. You can take this money and build a new life for yourself, far away from here. No one would blame you. You owe this place nothing. You owe me nothing. Or you can stay and fight. You can use this money and these papers to try and save our home. It is a hard road and a dangerous one. They are powerful people. But this house is more than wood and nails. It is your history. It is the last piece of us. Whatever you choose, know that I love you. I have loved you every second of every day. I am so sorry. Yours always, Grandma Eleanor. The letter fell from my fingers. The silent, dusty room swam before my eyes. Tears I hadn't let myself cry for 10 years came in a hot, silent flood. I cried for the little girl who thought she'd been thrown away. I cried for the grandmother who had sacrificed her reputation, her home, her final years, all in a desperate, secret battle to protect me. The story I had told myself, the story of abandonment, was a lie. The truth was so much more painful and so much more beautiful. She hadn't left me. She had hidden me. She hadn't been weak. She had been a warrior, fighting a war in secret and losing. I fell to my knees on the cold floorboards, the stacks of cash and the damning papers spread out around me. The weight of her sacrifice, of her secret struggle, crushed me. The laughter of the girls at the home, the pity in Mrs. Gable's eyes, the lawyer's gentle dismissal, it all came rushing back, twisted and reframed by the truth. They thought I had inherited $3. I had inherited a mission. I had inherited a war. And in that moment, kneeling in the wreckage of my grandmother's last stand, I felt the cold anger of grief begin to burn away the fear. I had a choice: run or fight, freedom or home. But looking at her handwriting, feeling the phantom weight of her hand on my shoulder, I knew it wasn't really a choice at all. It never was. If you've ever had a moment where the entire story of your life was turned upside down, where you learned that what you thought was a betrayal was actually a sacrifice, I want you to let me know in the comments. These are the stories that connect us, and for anyone out there who feels like they're fighting a battle no one else can see, please know you are not alone. Hit that like button if you've ever had to find strength in the middle of a storm. This community is for you. Now let's get back to the story, because my grandmother had given me the tools for a war, and I was about to learn how to use them. I spent the night in the house. I didn't have a sleeping bag, so I gathered all the dusty sheets from the furniture and made a nest on the living room floor, right next to the open hole where the box had been hidden. I didn't sleep. The cold was one reason, a deep, penetrating cold that settled into my bones. But the main reason was the letter. I read it again and again, the words burning themselves into my memory. With each reading, the grief sharpened into a fine, hard point of anger. They hadn't just taken her house. They had taken her from me. They had stolen the last 10 years of our lives together. The choice my grandmother had laid out for me seemed so clear in her letter, but sitting in the dark, silent house, fear was a living thing. The money in the box, the $60,000, was a ticket to anywhere. I could disappear. I could go to college, get an apartment, build a life that had nothing to do with debt or predatory lenders or lonely, creaking houses in the woods. I could take the easy path she had offered me. But every time I thought about it, I saw her face in my mind. I saw her standing in the social worker's office, manufacturing a lie that would save me and break her own heart. I saw her working odd jobs, stashing away crumpled bills, fighting a secret war she was doomed to lose. Taking the money and running would be like spitting on her grave. It would mean they had won, completely. Sometime before dawn, the fear finally gave way to resolve. It was cold and hard and settled deep in my gut. It wasn't a passionate, fiery decision. It was a quiet, grim acceptance of a duty I never asked for, but couldn't refuse. This was my house now. This was my fight. She had started it, and I was going to finish it. As the first pale light of morning filtered through the dirty windows, I found my phone. The battery was at 15%. I walked out onto the front porch, holding it up to the sky, trying to catch a signal. 1 bar appeared, then 2. It was enough. I found the business card Mr. Davies had given me and dialed his cell number. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Davies? Mr. Davies, it's Maya Morales." There was a pause. "Maya? Are you all right? Where are you?" "I'm at the house," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm at 10 Mile Creek." "You went out there?" "I advised you." "You need to come here," I interrupted, the words tumbling out. "You need to come to the house. My grandmother, she left something. More than the $3. You were wrong. There is something here." I could hear him sitting up, the rustle of sheets. "What did you find, Maya?" "Evidence," I said, the word tasting powerful on my tongue. "And a letter. And money. Not enough to pay them off, but enough to fight them. She left me a way to fight them." The silence on the other end of the line was long. I could imagine him, awake now, processing what I was saying. A secret stash of money. Evidence. A hidden story. It went against everything in his neat, orderly files. "Stay put," he said finally, his voice now sharp and fully alert. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't let anyone in the house. I'll be there as soon as I can. It's a 3-hour drive. I'm leaving now." He hung up. I stood on the porch as the sun climbed over the pine trees, the phone dead in my hand. For the first time, I wasn't just a victim of circumstance. I had made a choice. I had drawn a line in the dirt. I went back inside and carefully packed everything back into the metal box: the cash, the folder of documents, and the letter. I closed the lid and slid it back into the hole under the floor. I replaced the floorboard. It was my secret now, my armor. I spent the next 3 hours waiting, walking through the silent rooms, touching the furniture, trying to piece together the life that had been stolen from me. I wasn't just defending a piece of property. I was reclaiming a legacy. The fight wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about her, and I would not let her down. 3 hours later, a sensible sedan, entirely out of place on the muddy track, pulled into the yard. Mr. Davies got out, looking tired but determined. He wore jeans and a windbreaker, a far cry from the suit he'd worn in his office. He took in the peeling paint, the sagging porch, and then me, standing in the doorway. "Maya," he said, his expression a mixture of concern and intense curiosity. "Let's see what you found." I led him into the living room. The air was thick with anticipation. Without a word, I knelt, lifted the floorboard, and pulled out the heavy metal box. I set it on the floor between us and opened the lid. He stared at the bundles of cash, his eyes wide. Then he looked at the folder and the letter. "She wrote to you," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He picked up the letter, his hands gentle, as if touching a sacred relic. "Read it," I said. He sat down on the edge of a dust-sheeted sofa and began to read. I watched his face. I saw his professional calm slowly dissolve, replaced by a frown of concentration, then a flash of anger, then a deep, profound sadness. He read every word, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finally looked up, the kind, pragmatic lawyer was gone. In his place was a man who looked ready for a fight. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice a low growl. "Sterling, I remember him. Smarmy bastard." I knew it was predatory, but I had no idea it was this systematic. "This is criminal. This is racketeering." He set the letter down carefully and picked up the folder of documents. He spread them out on the floor, his lawyer's eyes scanning the pages with a new, aggressive focus. He saw the original loan agreement with its buried clauses. He saw the copies of the threatening letters from Apex. He saw my grandmother's meticulous notes, a list of other names, other properties in the county, with dates and question marks next to them. "She was building a case," he whispered, a note of awe in his voice. "The whole time I was telling her to declare bankruptcy, to give up, she was building a case against them. This isn't just an anecdotal defense, Maya. This is proof of a pattern, a conspiracy to defraud." He looked at me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a lost girl. He was looking at a client, a partner. "This changes things," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that sent a thrill of hope through me. "This doesn't just get us a delay. This gives us leverage, real leverage." "And the money?" I asked, pointing to the cash. "That's our war chest," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "It's not enough to pay the debt, no. But it's enough to pay for a real fight. It pays for depositions. It pays for a forensic accountant. It pays for me to stop all my other work and focus solely on this. We're not just going to stop the auction, Maya. We're going to sue them." The words hung in the air, audacious and terrifying. Sue them. A multi-million-dollar development corporation. "Can we win?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gathered the documents, his movements now precise and purposeful. "I don't know," he said honestly. "They have deep pockets and an army of lawyers. It will be a long, brutal fight. They will try to bury us in paperwork. They will try to intimidate you. But with this," he tapped the folder, "with your grandmother's work and with her story told by you on a witness stand, yes, I think we can win. Or at least, we can hurt them badly enough that they'll be forced to settle." He stood up, the dust motes swirling around him. "The first step is to file an emergency injunction to halt the auction, based on evidence of fraud. I'll draft it this afternoon. We'll also file a formal complaint against Apex Holdings and their parent company. The cash, we'll deposit it into the estate's trust account. It will be our retainer and our legal fund." He looked around the dilapidated room, at the ghost-like furniture and the peeling paint. "This is a good place," he said quietly. "Your grandmother was a good woman. She deserved better." He looked back at me, his eyes full of a fire I hadn't seen before. "Let's get her justice." And so it began. Not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of a pen on legal paper. Mr. Davies drove back to the city, the metal box in his trunk, leaving me alone in the house once more. But it felt different now. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with purpose. I was no longer a squatter in the ruins of my past. I was a guardian, standing watch over the last bastion of my family's honor. The days that followed were a strange mixture of tense waiting and hard, physical labor. While Mr. Davies waged war in courtrooms and conference calls, I waged my own war against the decay of the house. I started by cleaning. I found old rags and a bucket, and using water from a rain barrel outside, I began to wash away the years of dust and neglect. I washed the windows first, and as the clear light streamed in, the house seemed to take a breath. I took down the yellowed sheets, washing them by hand in the kitchen sink, and hanging them on a clothesline I rigged up on the porch. I beat the dust out of the rugs in the yard, the rhythmic thud of the broom handle against the wool, a steady, defiant heartbeat. Each task was a small victory. Every bit of grime I scrubbed away felt like I was erasing a piece of the shame and neglect Apex Holdings had imposed on us. I lived on the canned goods I found in the pantry, food my grandmother had put away years ago. Peaches and green beans and soup. It felt like she was still providing for me, sustaining me through the fight. I got a part-time job at the small general store down at the 10-Mile Creek crossing, the one the bus driver had mentioned. The owner was a woman named Mary, whose face was a road map of wrinkles and who remembered my grandmother well. Eleanor was a tough old bird, she told me one afternoon as I stocked shelves. Proud, too. Kept to herself those last few years. I knew she was struggling, but she'd never accept a handout. When she heard my story, the short version of it, she just nodded slowly. That sounds like her, fighting to the last breath. From then on, she let me take home bruised fruit and day-old bread without charge, small acts of kindness that felt like a lifeline. The legal battle was a slow, grinding machine. Mr. Davies would call me once a week with updates. We won the injunction. The auction was postponed indefinitely. Apex's lawyers responded with a motion to dismiss, calling our claims frivolous and without merit. We spent weeks in discovery, where our side demanded their records and they demanded ours. They tried to paint my grandmother as a financially irresponsible old woman and me as an opportunistic teenager looking for a payday. They sent investigators to 10-Mile Creek, men in dark suits who asked questions around town, trying to dig up dirt. But the small community, tight-lipped and suspicious of outsiders, gave them nothing. Mary told me she'd told them to get lost before they got a flat tire. It was the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere. The hardest part was the deposition. I had to sit in a sterile conference room in a Portland high-rise across a long, polished table from 3 of Apex's lawyers. They were sharks in $1,000 suits. For 6 hours, they questioned me. They tried to twist my words, to poke holes in my grandmother's story, to make me doubt my own memories. They asked about my time in foster care, implying I was unstable. They belittled my grandmother's meticulous notes. "Isn't it true, Miss Morales," one of them sneered, "that this evidence is nothing more than the paranoid scribblings of an elderly woman who mismanaged her own finances?" I looked him right in the eye, my voice shaking but clear. "No," I said. "It's the work of a woman who was being robbed and was smart enough to write it all down." I told them my story. I told them about the well. I told them about Mr. Sterling. I read parts of my grandmother's letter aloud, my voice cracking with emotion. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I knew I had done what I needed to do. I had been her voice. I had told her truth. A week later, Mr. Davies called. His voice was different. It was calm, but with an undercurrent of triumph. "They want to settle, Maya." My heart stopped. "What?" "They don't want this going to trial," he said. "They don't want your grandmother's letter read in open court. They don't want the other names on her list to be contacted by reporters. Your deposition, you scared them. A jury would love you and despise them. It's a PR nightmare they can't afford." "What are they offering?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. "They are offering to forgive the entire debt, every penny. And they are offering to sign the deed over to you free and clear. In exchange, we sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop the lawsuit. It wasn't a massive payout. It wasn't a public apology. It was a quiet, behind-the-scenes surrender. They would walk away, and we would get the house. We would get our home. "Do we take it?" I asked him. "Eleanor wanted justice," he said softly. "But I think, more than anything, she wanted you to have this house. She wanted you to be safe. This gives you that. The rest of the fight, the class action suit for the other families on her list, that's a fight for another day. And it's a fight we can start because of what she did." I looked around the living room. The afternoon sun was streaming through the clean windows, falling on the floorboards where the box had been hidden. The house was still old, still worn, but it was clean now. It was bright. It was mine. "We take it," I said. "Tell them yes." The final paperwork was signed a month later. It was anticlimactic, just a stack of papers and a notary's stamp. But when Mr. Davies handed me the new deed, with my name on it, I felt the weight of 10 years lift from my shoulders. The war was over. We had won. I walked out of his office, not with $3, but with a home. A real home, paid for not with money, but with a grandmother's love and a promise kept. The house was no longer a monument to a tragedy. It was a testament to resilience. I began the real work then, not just of repairing a roof or painting a wall, but of rebuilding a life. I used the money from the box, my grandmother's war chest, to hire a local contractor to fix the roof and the plumbing. I learned how to plaster walls, how to sand floors, how to plant a garden. Each nail I hammered felt like an act of defiance. Each seed I planted in the rich soil felt like an act of hope. The house slowly came back to life, and so did I. The porch swing I remembered from my childhood, I found it in the back of the old barn, dusty but intact. I sanded it down, gave it a fresh coat of paint, and hung it from new chains on the old oak tree. The first time I sat on it, pushing off with my feet and swinging gently in the afternoon breeze, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. This inheritance wasn't about the money, or even the property. It was about the story. My grandmother had given me the truth, and the truth had set me free. It had freed me from the anger, from the feeling of being unwanted. It had reframed my entire past. The scars of my time in the system were still there. They always would be. But they no longer defined me. They were just a part of a larger story, a story of a fierce, desperate love that crossed generations. Home, I realized, isn't just a place you live. It's a place that lives in you. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are and where you come from. For years, my story had been one of abandonment. Now it was a story of protection, of sacrifice, and of a quiet, stubborn strength I had inherited from the woman who had fought for me until her last breath. Standing on my porch, looking out at the valley she had loved so much, I understood. She hadn't left me a house. She had left me a foundation. And it was up to me to build on it. This whole journey taught me that the things we inherit are so much more than what's written in a will. We inherit struggles and strengths, secrets and sacrifices. We inherit the battles our families fought, and sometimes we inherit the chance to finish them. Maybe what you've been given looks like nothing. Maybe it looks like a burden, a debt, an empty house. But sometimes, if you look closer, if you're brave enough to lift the floorboards, you'll find the truth. You'll find the love that was there all along. You'll find your real inheritance. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family, your own home, or the battles you're fighting, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here for people who aren't afraid of the hard stories, because we know that's where the real strength is found. Share your own story in the comments below. What did you inherit that was worth more than money? I promise you, I will read every single one, because every story matters, every fight matters, and none of us are in it alone. Thank you for listening.